another fun thing to talk about is the communication style or communication difficulties within intercultural couples, especially if one person is, for example, Western or European and the other person is Japanese. It's very well known that, for example, in the West we shake hands and then in Japan they bow. But there's also things that are much more reflexive and really come down to body language. Like one example is when we think like, I'm gonna think like, interesting, they just pout their lips like this is their contemplation face, like pouting the lips. Or when we shrug our shoulders, we don't know, like, I don't know. It's, you don't even think about it, but they would tilt their head. And it's fun when you tell a story to several Japanese people at this, Japanese people that are there, and then they kind of, they don't know, but they don't shrug their shoulders, but they all at the same time, they tilt their head like, to the same side. So it's not an individual or a particular thing. It's really a cultural thing, like a national thing. And also their relationship to silence is much different. In the West, we have this concept of awkward silence, and you really want to avoid the awkward silence. Especially with someone you don't really know, or like your boss or a colleague. Then you just keep talking and have small talk just to avoid the awkward silence, so everyone feels comfortable, right? It's only with people you really know well, like family or your best friend or something, or good friends, that you can be silent and be comfortable and just enjoy the silence. But in Japan, silence is just part of normal conversation. It's not awkward. You can just, when there's a natural break in the conversation, you can just be silent and nobody feels awkward. And even to such an extent, I've heard that sometimes it feels like people just take a break, and it's seen as respectful that you just kind of sit there for 30 seconds in silence, kind of almost like everyone powered down. And to a Westerner, that's super uncomfortable, right? Like you're just sitting there staring and nothing happens. And that's something we would try to avoid at all costs, to not make everyone feel awkward. But in Japan, everyone kind of accepts this silence as part of normal interaction. So that's actually kind of nice, I think, because small talk often is quite annoying. But yeah, you have to know that it's part of the culture. And obviously, as is the case in my relationship, there's the language barrier, because I'm not a native English speaker, so I'm a Dutch speaker. And then I learned English just in school and by being exposed to American movies, American music, reading many books in English and so forth. It's often the case that if your native language is, for example, Dutch, or like many of the Scandinavian countries, that your language has a limited amount of native speakers, that because your country is kind of small, you're gonna have to interact with bigger countries to get by and to find your place in the world and have alliances, right? So we are aware we need to interact with the world, and that's why we're very good at learning English generally. And it's, for example, different for other languages that have a lot of native speakers, like French. French speakers often, not obviously, it depends on the person, but many of them don't speak English that well, or Spanish speakers don't speak English that well, at least in Spain, and so on. So my English has been quite good, has gotten quite good over the years, just by being interested in the world, because also if you speak English, there's many more resources available to you as compared to when you would only speak Dutch, right? It's just a numbers game. If there's 1 billion English speakers and 25 million Dutch speakers, yeah, there's going to be much more content available in English, right? But so usually Japanese people, it's also a big country with lots of native speakers, right? And so often people just learn Japanese, they are exposed to Japanese music, they are exposed to Japanese movies and culture and sitcoms, and there's no real reason for them to learn English. And the English they do learn in school, they learn in a very passive way, just learning vocabulary, and not really focusing on really learning how to speak. So it's like my wife, if you come to Europe at some point, she came to the UK on a working holiday visa when she was 29. She was not, in terms of language ability, she was not prepared at all to move to the UK. So the first year she really was thrown into the deep. And she was lucky she could count on kind of a Japanese network of people that helped her. And then also she found a job in a bank where the boss was very kind of understanding and lenient. And so she had time to kind of catch up and learn English to the extent that was necessary to function professionally. But even when I met her 4 years later in Belgium, I noticed that just when talking to her, there were huge gaps in her vocabulary, and sometimes very normal words she wouldn't know. So you have to kind of learn or figure out where the English level is and what you can say and what's understood and what's not understood. Like simple words like reassuring, she didn't understand. But sometimes that can lead to communication problems. For example, at some point I said, I don't feel like you're invested emotionally or you're invested in this particular topic. And she thought invested is only for financial things, right? So it was not at all appropriate in this conversation to talk about money. So she thought, why are you suddenly talking about money? And I was not talking about money at all, more like emotional investment in a certain topic or relationship or whatever. So then you really have to be patient with each other and presume the best intentions from one another. Otherwise, you're gonna get into trouble, right? And this kind of struggle all the time to communicate, it can really strengthen your relationship, but you have to be very patient with each other. And you have to be willing to try to understand each other and stay calm. And if there's a misunderstanding, not really flip out immediately, and really assume that the other one has good intentions, right? And give each other the benefit of the doubt. Otherwise, you're gonna get angry over something that she didn't even mean, and then your anger might make her angry, and it's all a big misunderstanding, and it's very hard to come back once the relationship has soured just from a misunderstanding. But so that requires like emotional stability and calmness from both people in the relationship. But also having to explain everything from scratch can also be like an advantage, because oftentimes if you have two people from the same culture, just because you're from the same culture, you think with very few words you can explain something, and the other person will understand, even though obviously they had a very different life as well, and maybe other presumptions in their head. But you kind of assume they're the same as you because you're from the same culture. And then that can also lead to misunderstandings, which I've also seen around me. And so in some way, having to explain everything from scratch can also be an advantage, and not take easy communication for granted can actually make you value when it does work, and when you're really kind of building your own way of communicating and your own like mini culture together, that you really start to value this achievement, right? It's like an achievement. But sometimes my wife complains like, you're repeating yourself. You don't need to keep repeating what you said because I understand already. But then I made this funny chart to her to explain why I need to actually repeat what I say, and to repeat myself often, because I already noticed if I don't do it, often the message gets lost and she didn't understand what I said, or I can see sometimes in her eyes she didn't understand, and then later it will cause difficulties or problems if then the agreement is not honored, or she didn't do what I asked, or I didn't do what she asked, or something. So it's very necessary to get the desired result and to really communicate properly, to repeat from time to time the same message. And then sometimes the misunderstandings can be weeded out before they really happen, right? Before they happen on a crucial point. So I made this chart, like a pie chart, for her to understand why I need to repeat myself often. So there's 25% chance that she's just not listening. You know, that's just a fact. Because it's also like a Japanese thing. They can really go into the zone and focus on something, just work or read or whatever. I cannot really do it. But Japanese people are much better at it. But yeah, I also have my visual difficulties, so it's easy for me to get distracted. But anyway, she can go into the zone and just not listen to whatever I say. So that's 25% of the of the cases. And then there's the case she listened to me and she kind of pretended to understand, but she didn't understand. And sometimes she's not upfront about some words she didn't understand, and then later when I repeated the same explanations, then suddenly she asked me, but what's this word? Then I noticed it was necessary to repeat what I said, because she didn't really give me the desired feedback or normal feedback. But having no normal feedback or the desired feedback is not necessarily a sign she didn't understand. So that's another difficulty. So there's also cases that she listened, she understood, and then there's no verbal or facial reaction. But that just that can mean that she's just thinking about it and she's considering what I said. So that's the thing I explained about Japanese being very comfortable with silence and having a very often passive reaction. But whereas in the West we have a very vivid reaction, often like facial reaction, but they have like a very passive facial reaction. So could be that she listened and she didn't understand, but could be that she understood, but she didn't really give me the desired feedback either, right? So here you don't get the desired feedback, and here you don't get the desired feedback, and here, yeah, she's just not listening, so you don't get the desired feedback. So there's 75% of the options that you're not really sure based on the feedback if she understood what you said. So that leads to another cycle of repetition, right? You want to make sure she understood. But then there's also 25% chance that she listened, she understood, and she gave you a relatively normal reaction. But then in that case, there's also something that I would consider quite annoying. Like we in the West, I think in general, I'm not sure all the Western countries, but at least in Belgium, when you listen to a story, you want to like regularly give a sign that you're listening and you understand, right? So you say, yeah, that's right. But then sometimes I do this whole explanation, she listened, she understood, and she gave me at least some reaction, so this is not the case. But then she instead of the like where the tone goes down, she gives me this That's not the reaction I wanted to hear, right? I wanted to get some sign of agreement or understanding. But if the tone goes up, if it's like, then you kind of also feel like repeating yourself, because it's like she didn't, it's like a question mark. But that might also just mean she's pondering the question or contemplating what you said. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a question. But so there's many cases that require repetition. Well, at least I feel like to my sentiment, I feel like repeating myself because I want to get what I consider the normal reaction, right? And to a Western person, that just means like, I get it. Yes, I will do it, or whatever, or just some normal answer. Not just silence or no facial reaction, and also not And then in this case, you often see in her eyes that maybe she didn't get this word, kind of insecure look in the eyes. So yeah, let's say at least 75% of cases you're gonna have to repeat your explanation. Well, I'm exaggerating for humorous effect, but yeah, oftentimes. And then when she says, yeah, you don't need to keep repeating yourself. No. Oftentimes I need to keep repeating myself just to avoid misunderstandings and to make sure we're on the same page and to make sure everything will go smoothly based on what we discussed, right? So that's kind of fun, because also it can be a difficulty, especially when the situation is already stressful with kids, for example, but it can also strengthen your relationship. And oftentimes it's very funny. Like, if the person has humor, because also, yeah, you should know that Japanese humor is very different. So there's no irony or no sarcasm. So I also already unlearned to make ironic or sarcastic jokes, because they just fall flat and it's just me then laughing and it's very awkward. But sometimes she's starting to kind of get the irony and the sarcasm, but mostly not. So I already unlearned, and I'm kind of, even when interacting with my normal Belgian friends or Western friends, I'm kind of losing the ability a little bit to have good sarcastic jokes, which is kind of sad because they're very funny if you have a good sarcastic joke. But Harumi is very funny in other ways, and I even kind of made a Microsoft Word file on my computer, kind of listing all the kind of funny situations that happened as a result of these kind of misunderstandings or kind of communication struggles. And yeah, it's also fun to look at this file sometimes, just because it shows you where you came from and how you're growing together and where you're going. And yeah, it's not necessarily a downside, it could be an upside, but yeah, it takes time, takes patience, takes a will of both people to understand each other and to grow together and grow towards each other. And especially in Belgium, we got already these two language communities, like the French speaking community and the Dutch speaking community. So we were kind of used to interacting with different cultures. And then on top of that, there's many foreigners in Belgium and immigrants. But obviously there's not many Japanese immigrants, because it's a very well-to-do country. It's a strong industrialized country. So there's not a lot of reason for Japanese people to kind of emigrate or flee their country or whatever. So the most international international communication would be with people maybe either from other Western countries, other European countries or Americans or whatever, or maybe from with refugees or from developing countries like Africa, like from countries from Africa or Middle East or whatever. So very different from communicating with a Japanese person. So even though I already had lots of experience with international communication, being like having spent half of my life in Antwerp, which is a big city with lots of immigrants, and then half of my life in Brussels, which is another big city, and even another, like with another predominant language, which kind of teaches you not to presume the same cultural background, and in communication you always kind of you're careful not to presume or assume too many things to make sure you're on the same page. So it's similar, but with Japanese person there's many extra dimensions that come with that, and it's been fun. So I'm very happy with how we've grown together, and now I'm learning Japanese to understand what she's saying to the children, and she's learning Dutch so she can understand what I'm saying to the children, and so we will keep growing together. And I'm curious where we will be in 50 years, whether we'll still speak English or maybe like a mix of Dutch and Japanese, we'll see. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.